to support our staff so that we could keep the building up and running. In the next slide, the additional program. So as we continue to iron it out and keep everybody safe, but offer a wonderful opportunity to still have that face-to-face instruction, we also knew that members of our family and our communities were struggling in our 18 communities. So Tammy Crockett and the culinary staff, as well as the administration, joined the USDA and created a plan to support students for free breakfast and lunch. In addition, the plan also allows students to receive breakfast and lunch when they were not at Monty Tech. So they created a nutritional service where they would pack these big bags of beautiful fresh food, very impressive actually, where over 400 students had signed up for the program for both breakfast and lunches per week. So really proud to be, just another support system to families in our region that were truly struggling due to the COVID pandemic. In addition, as you know, we've been to your group before, your committee, where we've talked about our one-to-one Chromebook initiative. So thankful to Barbara Reynolds and our school committee to have, certainly they'd never thought that we were going to be in a pandemic, but due to their support of having a one-to-one Chromebook initiative already in place for 4 years, when we had to pivot to remote, we already had what we like to refer to as the engine in the plane. As we were projected in the air of remote, at least we had the infrastructure to transition to support our students' learning until we were able to re-enter the building in the face-to-face hybrid capacity in September. In addition, we used additional dollars to purchase new smart boards, as well as 2G and 4G video streaming. For those students that chose to go remote totally, we bought additional cameras and Chromebooks and all different types of technology that was needed, including, as we all know, Zoom, because that's all we do is live on Zoom these days. We needed a license to support the educational platform. In addition, we collected and went after competitive grants. And on the next slide, you'll see that there are 3 specific ones that I'd like just to bring your attention to this evening. We did apply for a safe and supportive school grant through DESE that we thought was really important to go for. And although we were in a pandemic and we know that people are afraid and uncertain, we really want to be able to survey our student staff and our 9th graders to let them know that we want to figure out what we can do more to continue to support our students to be successful at Monty Tech. So we're in the process of doing that. We're actually going to use some of those materials and help developing our 3-year district improvement plan. In addition, we wrote a math skills capital grant for $323, and we're thrilled to announce that we've received it. And this is helping to support our culinary arts program, our school cafeteria, our greenhouse. And not only during the day, it helps support our high school students, but as I had mentioned in the past in various presentations, in the evening, Monty Tech does not close their doors at 3 o'clock. We're open till 10 o'clock Monday through Thursday, servicing 1,700 adults in our adult training and retraining programs. So whatever we are getting for skills capital grant equipment, it's being used twofold for our region. In addition, the Career Tech Initiative grant, we received $125,000. Again, this is for our adult program where we partnered with North Central Career Center, our continuing ed program, to help adult students in HVAC at no cost. We were able to secure some state funding. And with that, the next slide, I'd like to ask Tammy Crockett to take it from here and talk to you about the specific numbers in our budget.
Thank you. Yes, this is where the fun starts. So I always like, and most of you could probably do my presentation now in your sleep, but I always like to start off with what the state is doing. So the state has committed this year to funding the Student Opportunity Act, which it meant to do last year, but due to the pandemic, it put it off for a year. And really, what that act does, and you can read here, is it makes higher foundation budget rates for certain sections in the foundation budget that they felt were underfunded. So you can see what those are. So with that, the state is putting in some additional Chapter 70. And again, it talks to the new rates, and as well as especially fringe benefits, because as we know, the foundation budget for districts was not keeping up with the inflation and the cost increases to health insurance and other costs such. The next slide kind of shows you what I'm talking about when I say that they're increasing the foundation budget rates. This is a breakdown of each grade level to the side and then each cost category over to the top. So again, when you look at some of the places they're increasing amounts, guidance, fringe, employee benefits, special ed tuition. So this is just an overview of what I was talking about. The next slide will show you specifically how it affects Monty Tech. So this is our foundation budget. So again, they take our number of students in our foundation enrollment. And I always like to remind you that foundation enrollment is number of students from our district towns that are enrolled and attend Monty Tech. The number of students who live in our district towns who school choice to another vocational school, and any number of students who live in our district towns who attend our Chapter 74 practical nurse program. So that is the count. And then the others, again, are above base, and just to give you what we have to spend for each pupil. So in our case, our foundation budget this year is $25,842,191 or $17,688 per pupil. This is our, and I like to always say these numbers just because it helps further in the presentation. This is our base spending per pupil. This is the minimum required we have to spend, and it does not include transportation or debt service. So moving to the next slide, it's a analysis of our Chapter 70 money. So off to the left, you can see what we're receiving this year in 21. Then they do a calculation on what they think we should receive. Well, because we're currently receiving more than our foundation aid calculates, we are not getting additional Chapter 70 money. We are only getting the minimum that every school district is getting in the state, which is the $30 per pupil. So we are only receiving $43,830 in additional Chapter 70 funding. Now that's really important when we move over to the right-hand side, because I think this is one of the challenges that I am speaking to, that I spoke to the school committee about, that I be speaking to the town. Our required net school spending went up this year by $556,530, as you can see. Now, this is really in part because of the Student Opportunity Act, because they've increased the spending on those different foundation rates. But if you look at our additional Chapter 70 aid, it's only $43,830. That means, and you can see it in the column above that, the requirement for the communities increased by $512,700. So it's really that, and this is, I always like to do the Tammy editorialization, that they're funding the Student Opportunity Act on the backs of our communities, is how I feel. And it's obvious with these numbers moving forward. So going to the next slide. This is something brand new this year too. And if you wanted to ask me if there was an issue or a concern, I would say it's with our Sr2 funding. Now, what the Sr2 funding is it's federal stimulus grant that school districts received. We received ESSER $1 earlier, which is used for COVID prevention, all the stuff you need for COVID. So we put a lot of our technology into these grants, our PPE, et cetera. Well, in December of 2020, the feds enacted more federal stimulus money to go to school districts, and they call it ESSER 2. And something that has never happened before, at least in my tenure, the governor put in his Chapter 70 budget for his House 1 budget a requirement that all schools will use up to 75% of their total ESSER award to offset an increase to a community's required minimum contribution at the community's request. Well, our school committee said, we are using this money to offset our district, so we are using it. Couple of concerns with this, because Lunenberg is one of our towns that is using it, that we are using it towards. This is one time. Well, first, let's start with this year. It's only in the governor's budget. People are pushing back on this. Regionals, schools, legislators that represent them are pushing back on this use. They're saying it's like using Title I dollars to offset an assessment. It's federal grant money. So that being said, it's still just in the House 1 numbers, but again, hopefully they take into account that we are, as regionals, planning to use this and don't want to be giving our communities false numbers. Second,
can I ask a question for clarification on
this? Please.
So when you're referring to these ESSER 2 dollars, are these ESSER 2 dollars that is Monty Tech money? Or is this ESSER 2 dollars that has been allocated to the communities themselves that you are drawing?
Nope, this is Monty Tech money.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. So the other concern I have is we're using this as a revenue source for the FY22 budget, but it's a revenue source that goes away for FY23. So it gives our communities a funding cliff moving into FY23. And I think when we go to the next slide, you'll see how it's the state actually did the calculations for districts, because the calculation was getting a little bit complicated in some instances. So going over this slide, you can see that I'm going to focus on Lunenberg. So the first column is your change in your foundation enrollment numbers. So you went from 82 to 83. So that's an increase of 1 pupil. The next column is the required minimum contribution. And again, this is set by the state. This is based on what they call the ability to pay by a community. So you can see Lunenberg is going from 814,475 to 871,244, which is an increase of 56,769 in the required minimum contribution. Now moving over to the right, you'll see where the ESSER comes into play. So at the top of the box, it says the regional ESSER 2 allocation. So Monty Tech is allocated 651,823. That's what we're getting in this federal grant ESSER 2. We could use up to 75% of that allocation, or the 488 number, to offset community required contributions. So you'll see in the columns moving to the right, Lunenberg represents 8% of our ESSER dollars of the 75%. So Lunenberg could be allocated 40,758 to offset their increase. Your increase is more than that number, so we can use the entire amount. I just want to point out a couple of other things. If the community did not have an increase, they get to use none of the ESSER dollars towards the assessment. And if you look at a situation, let's just say such as Gardner, you'll see that their required increase was $7,495. They would have been entitled to 49,000 of our ESSER dollars, but it can only be up to the equal to the increase. So I hope just that little scenario kind of makes sense to everybody. So we are using the 40,758 to offset Lunenberg's required minimum contribution, but you can see how this could create the funding cliff for next year without that dollar. So going on to the next slide. This is the next one talks about Monty Tech's total budget. So we've talked about the categories in there. Our total budget that was approved last night is $29,114,049, or a $299,000 184 increase, resulting in a 1.04% budget increase. You can see our Chapter 70 funds we're applying, also the ESSER $2 that are being applied as the state calculated. Then the district is proposing using $450,000 of its E&D to bring the assessment increase down to where it stands at the total assessments of $11,278,600, or 2.69% increase, which thankfully for the, I would say for the ESSER dollars, because originally as you saw earlier, the community assessments went up by a minimum of 512,000. So the ESSER dollars was able to cut that down. The next slide shows a breakdown of the community assessments. So again, talking to you about Lunenberg, you have 83 pupils in the foundation enrollment. So the foundation budget that's attributed to Lunenberg for Monty Tech is $1,468,105. And again, that's purely the 83 times the 17,688 that we saw in the earlier foundation budget calculations. Then moving on to the required minimum contribution, we saw that the state calculated that. Then we subtracted out the ESSER $2, then took in Lunenberg's proportionate share for transportation and above. And I should point out, I didn't point it out on the previous slide, we always like to say that we really try to play it close to our required minimum contribution. And this budget only proposes being 2.3% above our required net school spending. The next component would be Lunenberg's share of the capital assessment, putting the proposed FY22 assessment for Lunenberg at $897,448, which is an increase of $20,850 over this year. The next slide gets to the meat of how the state determines Lunenberg's ability to pay. It's the, so if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide, I'm sorry. This, again, you guys have seen this from me 1,000 times and you've seen it. They take your property values, they take the income of the residents, and they come up with how much the state determines Lunenberg could pay, which is line 7, $12,011,358. Number 8 is the foundation budget. So that's the foundation budget for both Lunenberg Public and Monty Tech. And the maximum any community can pay is 82.5%. So even if you are, like, as I like to say, one of the W communities, and you can afford far more than your usual, than the foundation budget, the state will still give you 17.5% Chapter 70 aid toward your school districts. So Lunenberg, again, is the 12 mil. And then moving over to the right-hand side, you'll see what you're paying, your required contribution was for this current year to both school districts. They multiply that out by the municipal revenue growth factor, and again, calculated by DOR, not Tammy Crockett, coming up with the preliminary contribution of $11,600,000 $778,929. Well, you may disagree, but they say this is short from what they calculated that you could pay. So they're taking that shortfall, and because it's small enough, they go by percentages. They're not adding any additional funding to it. They're just saying, okay, it is what it is. Your required contribution towards your school districts this year will be $11,778,929. When you go to the next slide, you see how they allocate that 11 million out to the 2 school districts you belong to. So looking at the bottom half, you see Lunenberg, and then you see Massachusetts, and we represent 7.4% of that total foundation budget number. So they've allocated 7.4% of that 11,778,929 that they said you can afford to pay towards Monty Tech. And you can see how they've applied the remaining, or the initial 92.6% off to Lunenberg Public. The next slide is an analysis or comparison that I always like to show you of how your assessment changed from year to year. So really, the significant increase to it was the required minimum, which is dictated by the state. And fortunately, at this point in time, we're able to use that Sr2 funding to offset a significant portion of it. And then I'd like to give you the calculation to the right of, it works out to be $10,813 per pupil from Lunenberg's tax base to go to Monty Tech. The rest comes in form of state aid. The next slide is kind of a, where are we spending the money? Where's the changes from year to year? So I'm going to point out just a few of the significant ones. Our district technology, line 1450, we have a significant increase there because we're moving a lot of our servers that are in-house to cloud-based, because it's going to save us money in the future. We're going to be able to have more room and move things easily. So we're in the process of doing that. Of course, in other areas, the teaching services, again, that's, contractual movements. And we are proposing in this budget to put a couple of FTEs back into it, which I will tell you in another slide. We're decreasing funding to instructional technology, and you'll also see in our maintenance accounts, because these are the accounts. It's not that we're going to necessarily have less spending, but these are the account categories that we can use those other ESSER dollars that I showed you that we're allocating, because those have to be used on COVID related. Those are the categories we can use them in. So we'll be transferring the expenses to that Sr2 funding. Also increase to employee benefits. This represents a 5% increase to our health benefits. Next slide. I told you we're proposing to use $450,000 from our excess and deficiency account. So currently, at June 30th, that account had 1.287 million in it, which is 4.5%. And we're proposing to use 450,000 that to offset to reduce our FY22 assessments. And each year we've been putting a small amount, approximately 40,000 into our stabilization fund. So the balance at June 30th is $226,040. And this, again, we are trying to build slowly so that we can fund some of those larger capital items without having any significant increases to our community's assessment for capital, because we do have some capital items on our future plan that could be $500,000 or better. So we're just trying to get that to help offset. The next slide is what I was talking about. This is what we're hoping to do with this budget with staffing. We had a layoff of a vocational instructor last year, and we had a retirement of a vocational instructor last year that we did not fill. Because we were not open to the public this year, we did not need to fill those positions. We were actually able to move some staffing around. But because we plan to be open fully next year, we're planning to recall and fill those positions. Another FTE, we've had a teacher in our Perkins grant for 3.5 years, and she has to be moved back to the general fund for grant rules. So that's in this budget. We also laid off a support staff that we plan to recall. And we did not have a school resource officer this year that we've had for the past several years because we were only open in hybrid and not open. So we plan to put that back in. The next piece that we plan to do is Dr. Harity told you about that Safe Schools grant that we received for $10,000. And we were able to establish a team of people to look, to do surveys, to do reflections, tools, and we're going to take their recommendations and implement them into our district improvement plan. So we are going to have to establish programs, et cetera, to help to implement those. So that's also what we're planning for this budget. The next slide continues on with our goals for this year. Student supplemental learning support, really big because we need to stop some of the learning, some of the slides that happened this year with kids not being in school full time. So we're planning on enhancing our summer learning programs, after school programs, before school programs, all that to provide additional supplemental learning for our students. We've also applied for a Mass Life Science grant and that we're hoping to receive to revise some curriculums and add some programs. And we have some science classrooms that need to be updated in order to house these programs because some of our science classrooms are significantly old. Part of our building capital improvement plans is we're replacing our main building generator. I think it was put in place in the building before the building was actually built. It's very antiquated. I see Dr. Harity laughing, but it's very old. It's at least as old as the building. So that's part of the replacement. We're also doing HVAC system rebalancing. We're updating our controls. Our system's relatively new, but it's been advised that we need to do some rebalancing. And that's been a significant, we're very fortunate that we did that upgrade approximately 7 years ago, because that's what allowed us to open too, because everybody was really confident in our air circulation. We know how important that is. So keeping up with that is extremely important. The next item on our building capital improvements is our fire alarm panel. And again, I think that was put in at the start of the building. The last slide, I like to end with this because I'd like for you to know how your vocational school compares with spending to the other vocational schools in the state. And this is per pupil spending. It's based on FY19 data. It was updated February 21st, as you can see. And I like to sort it from the highest, which North Shore didn't have any figures in there, but from the highest per pupil spending to, as I always say, the most efficient per pupil spending. So you can see where Monty Tech lies amongst the state vocational schools. So we try to do a great job for you, for our communities, with the most economical approach that we can take. And that is my presentation. I would be happy to answer questions.
Do we have any hands up there? Let's see. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, how many members are on the school committee and how is that apportioned?
We have Dr. Harity, I'll let you.
Sure. There's 22 school committee members, and we have one for each town. We've got 4 for Fitchburg and 2 for
2.
Gardner. Yeah, and it's proportioned based on the number of students at our school.
Okay, and they get a salary to be on that?
No.
Why is there a salary line item for it? What is that? On slide 15.
The salary for the school committee would just be the stipend that the secretary receives to take minutes at the meetings.
So the stipend for minutes is $40,000 a year?
Oh, goodness, no. What slide are you looking at?
Slide 16? Did I read that wrong?
Oh, that's not the salary line. That's their total function. The 46.5 represents the total function for school committee. So that's dues. We charge a lot of the main school, like so to belong to NEASC, to belong to certain other, we charge that all off to the school committee line. There's no salary line in there. And you also got a copy of the budget itself in your packets. That will give you a more detailed line item. You'll be able to see it broken down like supplies and materials, et cetera. So the only salary or stipend that comes out of school committee is the stipend for the secretary.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, the other thing to point out, as you talk about school committee, our rep is on the school committee is Barbara Reynolds, who basically went there from the finance committee, having been the finance committee rep. I believe, I don't know if Barbara is still the chair of the finance committee on the school committee, or if she's
No.
moved on. You've moved on from that too. Okay, very good. Peter, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. My only note here was you mentioned a 5% increase in health insurance related benefits,
Yes.
which our assessments in the town of Lunenberg are substantially less than that this year. And we're also going to experience some premium holidays and that sort of thing that are, albeit once again, one-time savings, are potentially going to put us in a position where we can better plan for some of these cliffs that we're about to run into in FY23. I'm wondering if you have any reason to anticipate that you might be able to find additional savings.
So we are self-insured. So we don't pay premiums, we pay claims. And our health plan runs from December 1st to November 30th. So it's always a split for each year. We were fortunate this year, December 1st, we only had a 1.8% health insurance increase. But my health insurance advisors warn against increases coming down the pike, because now people will, after COVID, will begin doing those elective surgeries. They'll begin doing those elective procedures that they did not do during COVID. So we will see an increase to our expenses there. We will be working with the employee group to try to find plan design changes, et cetera, for the next plan to try to help bring those costs down. But that's the reason for that increase.
Okay. I have one additional question, and this is, I really don't know how any of this works, so please educate me and maybe comment in terms of what you're experienced over the course of the last year. We experienced some departments that substantially underspent in FY20 because of the shutdown that occurred in March, and are projecting some savings in the current fiscal year as well, due to the fluctuations largely in association with changing guidance and that sort of thing, as well as some savings that have just come as a result of grants that we've been able to offset planned spending. How does that work at Monty Tech? Have you realized any savings? And can you, does free cash at Monty Tech work the same way that free cash works at a municipality? And can you realize any of those benefits in the next fiscal year?
So yes, so to start with, yeah, we did have some initially underspending from March to June because we weren't open. But they did their pre-spending for this year, so the shops got all their supplies to be open. So we used up that funding, but yet, yes, some of the unspent funds went to our excess and deficiency account, which is the term of your free cash for the town. Ours is called excess and deficiency. So the way money gets into our E&D, which is similar to free cash, is that we don't spend our whole budget, or we get revenues above what we budgeted for or unanticipated. And that's what goes into our E&D account. We budget so close to our net school spending requirement. Like I said earlier, we're 2% above. So we legit have to spend at least all of our net school spending requirement, or we get I'll call it a nasty gram. Sheila calls it a Dear Sheila letter from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education saying, look, you didn't spend all your requirement. And that puts you on notice for future years, because for the next year, what they do is they add that to your spending requirement. So they don't allow you to get away with underspending that. So the fact that we did underspend some of our categories, especially in capital and transportation, because we were able to cut the percentages of that, that's what allowed us to put money into E&D again at the end of last year, which then in turn allows us to have $450,000 for this year to offset community assessments. Because we're budgeting so close to the wire, that normally wouldn't be the case. It'd be a smaller amount going into E&D. So we were able to again use $450,000 from that account. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it did. I didn't note the 450,000 when I reviewed your budget, but for it now. So
yeah, if you look in the budget summary sheet, you'll see, I believe we're using $300,000 to offset the transportation and other operating expenses, and then $150,000 to offset capital.
This is the last couple slides of the presentation.
okay.
Yep.
So my final question is, you've just outlined some savings that you've been able to, that from the last fiscal year that you are able to effectively apply to the next fiscal year. You outlined some Sr2 savings that, have been applied to our assessments. Is there any way for you to project how steep that cliff is going to be next year?
If I could predict that, I would be playing the lottery tonight. But I mean, I can say that, as you see, again, we try to play it close to our spending, our requirements. So we try to find savings and write grants every which way. But what the governor, what the state revenue, it looks like, what the feds are going to come up with, is there going to be another stimulus plan? How's it going to be funded? Those are really unknowns.
I recognize those variables, but let's, assume for a moment
Yeah.
that everything stays the way it is with
Sure.
respect to trends for Chapter 70 and or, let's just play worst case scenario and say we're not going to get additional federal money. But with an Sr2 funding drop off, with one-time savings in your equivalent, I can't remember the term you used, of excess and deficiency. That needs to be applied to assessments next year, right? So
Correct.
we should just add those two numbers together and plan for the worst.
Well, so definitely I would say, looking at that $40,000 ESSER funding, I would keep that definitely in the back of your mind. And another thing is the Student Opportunity Act that we talked about at the start of my presentation, that keeps increasing those foundation budgets. This is year 1 of 7. They did front load it a little bit this year because they didn't do it last year, but think on the lines of those types of increases potentially over the next 7 years. And if the state doesn't fund more Chapter 70 towards those increases, they're putting it back on the backs of our communities again. So that's like, again, the TME commentary, I guess, but hopefully those are things to keep in mind as well. And your school committee rep and our school committee does everything possible to keep your assessments as low as, still being able to provide the great education that we do to the kids.
Yeah, the other unknown in there, just to throw it out there, is 1 year we thought we were going to do really, really well, and we were going to actually have a reduction, but then there was a significant number of students from Lunenberg who enrolled, so that kind of threw that tips. So that's also just an unknown in there in terms of what the enrollment's going to look like. But I'm sorry, are you set, Peter?
I just thought of one additional question, so I beg your pardon.
No, that's okay.
Enrollment. So in the past, we talked about allocations per town and then availability after those allocations due to capacity and that sort of thing. How are you running enrollment relative to capacity?
So our enrollment, we usually stay about 1,435 students every year. We're a little lower this year because of having 700 students in the school each day. And if a student had left, maybe their family moved to a different district or they chose to go back to their sending communities district, we were less apt to backfill just because we were very cautious and wanted to continue to support our safety plan and keep everybody safe in our building. So our numbers dipped just slightly this year, but just based on COVID. But consistently, we stay at between 1,425, 1,435.
So we should anticipate that your enrollment will increase next year?
No, because we're at our max. We have about
Right,
a 250 student wait list, 200 to 250. Okay. Yep. So since I've been there as superintendent, we've kept it the same number so that we're attempting for years prior. It just kept on ticking up. Originally, it was like 800, and every year they were adding probably another 100 seats or so. We've stayed consistent for the last 7 at approximately 1,435.
Thank you very much.
I would like to just add, if you don't mind, an unknown to your enrollment, because Monty Tech's enrollment stays, like to Dr. Harity's point, we stay on a plane. But in the foundation enrollment, I'd like to point out that that also includes the school choice kids who live in Lunenberg, who might choose to go to another vocational school. Those get added in, and we have no control over as well. And that can fluctuate year to year depending upon the wants of your citizens. So just wanted to put that out there.
Okay. Chris? You're muted.
So I understand that Monty Tech is helping with a project in the early design phases, if you will, on the old primary school. Are there other types of projects like that could be used kind of for credit and help the sending towns that we could utilize? There's a lot of, information technology as an example. I think our town needs some information technology improvements. HVAC is stuff that we're looking at, even some carpentry and cabinet making. We're redoing a kitchen as an example. So are those options that could be used to kind of have a win-win situation?
Of course. So your community members reach out to myself or our vocational director, Jim Hashey, And every year we build 2 houses for Habitat for Humanity. In addition to that, we also do numerous projects throughout our 18 communities. This is our way to provide real-world learning experiences for our students, and at the same time, it gives us the opportunity to give back to our towns and cities that make up Monty Tech. So if there were additional projects, whoever had already reached out to Jim or myself, they can continue to do just that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
They worked
Other-
on, well, this is Barbara. I just wanted to say they worked on the cemetery the past few years.
Yep.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Heather.
And I would just add on to that, they're currently working at the building that's being built at the North Cemetery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, they're still,
It's been 2 years now. They did the ADA improvements to the bathroom and the second floor of the town hall.
oh yeah, that's right.
They worked with Jim Hatchie on that project. But I just had a question in regards to the school choice kids. Do we currently have any school choice kids going to other vocational schools?
I think this.
We had a handful last year, I recall.
From Lunenberg? From,
Sam, you're muted.
Tammy, you're muted.
Sorry, please forgive me. I just have to look that up.
I thought she was muttering under her breath and didn't want to say.
I'll just take a second to look it up, but if there's other questions, I can respond to that while I'm doing this.
Does
Maybe
anybody
just a
else?
follow-up question of what's that cost? Because some, it's the transportation cost as well. Or no?
Yep, so it gets added as the state looks at it just as your foundation enrollment. So we use that number across the board for everything. So yes, it gets applied.
We don't pay transportation costs on school choice though, right?
It just becomes part of your, you have 5 students school choicing out current for this year.
So if they were to attend, say, a agricultural vocational school in a different part of the state, doesn't that get absorbed, the transportation cost for getting that student there get absorbed?
So what would happen with the Aggies is I think they would, because we don't normally get school choice from the Aggie schools, I think they would actually go to the town and ask permission to go there, and then that would get billed separately to the town, not through your school choice. The students who you currently have school choice go to Leominster, CTE, and Neshoba, Voc Tech.
Mhm.
Okay, Evan?
Just to kind of piggyback off of Heather's question, do we have any school choice coming to Monty Tech from elsewhere? And if so, does that get used to offset?
So students who come to Monty Tech from Lunenberg are in district students.
Well, if we have 5 students that are going school choicing to other VOTEC schools, do we have any that are coming to Monty Tech from?
Oh, we have school choice. Oh, so we have school choice coming in. Yes, we have. We have 15 coming in. So those dollars, we get $5,000 per pupil. I'm sure you're aware of the school choice. So we get that and we put that into a separate revolving fund. And we use those funds for whatever to benefit the school, the students in general. So if we need to purchase more technology, we use funds from that. So that does not come out of our budget, and it doesn't come out of a community's assessment. The community doesn't pay for it, so we use those to.
Yeah, if I could add too, because it's important for people to know, we would never accept a student in 9th grade for school choice because we have 250 of our own students in our region on a wait list. the people that Tammy is typically referring to are students that their families, after they've been a student at Monty Tech, maybe a year or two, their families moved out of district, maybe Clinton, Worcester, where have you, Rutland, and they still want to remain at the school. We don't want to kick the students out. So if their families decide to stay, we allow them to stay at Monty Tech and continue, and then they become a school choice student. We might fill as well if there's someone, if we have an extra spot in one of our programs and someone from out of district wants to come in as an upperclassman and there's no one else in our district that wants that seat, we'll consider that as well. But again, we're here to serve primarily almost 99.5% of our region.
Each year, a school committee has to vote to say if they will accept school choice children or not. And each year, our school committee votes that they will only accept grades 10 through 12 school choice, no freshmen.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, ladies, for very informative presentation again. And I know for anybody new to the presentation, it'll probably take a year or two of presentations to be able to keep up with what all the formulas are, where they all come from, and that, no, it's not Tammy's fault. Messenger. Well, that's the part of the presentation I always remember. Please don't hurt me. So,
Thank
so
you,
with
Terry,
that,
yes.
with that, again, thanks again. And I'm going to assume that one of the things, just to explain also, now when your budget gets voted on, typically it has to be approved by member districts, and it's typically approved by the time we come to town meeting.
No, you're early.
I can't remember the last time our vote mattered that much, because you were pretty much, I think, maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but
You're early. And if I could say, like we said in the last election, every vote matters. So we appreciate you and your support.
okay.
What happens if we did vote to not approve the
We'll
budget?
get to pay, trust me.
It would
I mean,
basically,
the formulas don't seem right. I mean, the
They're
fact that we
not.
pay the
They're
same as
not.
Holden is
well, that's
crazy.
the state. That's the state, and
Yeah, but-
that's. Yeah, no, I understand, but I think basically what'll happen is that I think it's just a majority of the member districts have to vote to approve, or is it a
Two-thirds.
supermajority?
2/3.
Okay, of the participating districts have to vote to approve. Is it
Right.
participating districts or members of the school committee?
Participating districts. We need 12.
Okay.
So Pittsburgh gets 4 votes or 1 vote?
Just one.
No, 1.
That's why I had asked. Yeah, that was. All right. Well, again, thank you again, and we'll see you in a year.
Thank you
Thank
very
you. Have a
much.
good evening.
Thank
All
you.
right,
Thank
For
you.
having us.
nice job, Tammy.
Oh, thanks, Barb. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right, and then with that, if somebody wants to pull up the DPW presentation, unless you wanted to share your own screen and control your own presentation, or would you prefer somebody else handle it? And you're muted and you can unmute yourself, please. Thank
I
you.
would be happy to let someone else run it for me.
Okay.
I don't
You don't-
have that handy.
Nope.
for some
I do have it right up, so I can do it. That's fine.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and do it?
All right, let me see. I haven't done this before, so bear with me.
This will be fun.
All right, do you see my presentation?
Not yet.
You have to transfer the host to Rob.
Actually, I just have it set for multiple participants can share simultaneously,
Oh.
so he should be able to just go ahead and share it. Did you click on the share screen down at the very bottom?
I did, oh, wait a minute, and there is.
And then did you find the presentation and click on it?
I did find it, and it's telling me it's invalid.
Okay, so we'll find somebody who has a valid copy of your budget.
Huh?
Evan, you got it?
Evan has it. Has something.
Yeah, I don't know what he's got. I'm gonna have to, be careful with Evan. Okay, so
back up.
Evan's got your presentation up, so you're all set to go, Rob?
He's
All
got
right.
pavement.
So for those of you that don't know me, haven't met me, I'm Robert Oliver. I'm the DPW director. So please bear with me and be kind. This is my first budget presentation to you. Go ahead, next slide. So the DPW is composed of the highway, cemetery, facilities, and sewer divisions. And those other than sewer are represented here in this budget. Sewer, of course, is their own enterprise and their own budget. Next slide, please. Our organizational chart, which is essentially the same, with the exception of, you see the 3 in red. We have, those are our proposed positions in this budget. The largest of which is a facilities technician, who would be under the facilities superintendent, Kit Walker. This is a major need that's been identified. Our facilities budget is quite large, and currently we just have our facilities superintendent handling all of our public buildings and grounds. So as identified here, we are proposing a facilities technician, which salary, other benefits are incorporated into this budget. Besides that, you can see under the cemetery superintendent, we have 2 seasonal laborers that we've also identified as a need and included in this budget. Currently, the cemetery superintendent relies on help from the highway department, as well as hiring outside contractors just to do routine maintenance in the spring and the fall, specifically spring and fall cleanups. And during the course of the season is just busy himself with taking care of the cemeteries, mowing and trimming and other things that come up, as well as getting ready for services at the cemeteries. So those have been identified. Those laborer positions, I'm planning on 13 weeks of service at 19 hours a week per laborer. We've also included a smaller clothing allowance for things like boots and safety gear. So instead of the $1,100 that the DPW workers get, we're proposing half that, $550 per laborer for that position. So there's my organizational chart. There's really no changes other than the additions I just talked about. Next slide. This is our DPW line item budget. So these are the major categories within the budget. For the most part, the budget has been level funded. There were some items where I was looking for increases for certain things. I'll speak specifically to those. Highway overtime has been funded at $6,700.90 for the last few years. When I look back 5 years, it seemed to average right around $10,000. So I had requested that increase, which has been approved. So that's in the budget at $10,000. Highway labor, I had originally was looking for a mechanics assistant as well. After discussion with Heather, we're not doing that. And so we basically pulled that out. There was a minor increase in there of roughly $6,000. Heather, I don't recall exactly what that was. I don't know if it was part of what I asked for, but that went up slightly. Under cemetery department, the 2 seasonal workers that I had mentioned, those are reflected in that. It's an increase of about $13,000. Actually, no, slightly more than that, $23,000. But that also includes roughly $13,000 for the seasonal employees. And then we've also introduced a supply line in the cemetery department of $10,000. That's for things like tools, equipment, piles of loam, seed, fertilizer, general supplies. Cemetery department hasn't typically had that, and I know Heather's tried to bump that up last year. We've seen the need, so we're asking for it. And then under Director of Facilities and Grounds, the addition of the facilities technician is reflected in that increase. The 43,743 above target was added in for that. Those are the major changes in the budget. As I mentioned, most items are being level funded at this point. Next slide. This chart just represents the allocation of our budget, and you can see that general highway is almost 24% of our budget. Of that, 65% is paving. And then as you go around, the next biggest item would be facilities at 19% of our budget. So the second largest item on there has one person basically responsible for it. So you can just from that almost see the need for another employee under facilities. And then everything else is just broken down to even DPW garage, which is 0.04% of the budget, which is essentially just office supplies. Next, please. This is an interesting slide. It's approximate cost of services to average homeowner in 2021. So in 2021, average family home value was $351,400. The average tax bill in town was $6,234. When you break that out among the various items in the general budget for the town, public works, education, public safety, general expenses, debt service, general government, culture, and human services, public works in the reddish color is a small piece of the pie. And roughly for the average property owner, taxpayer, their contribution to public works is $431 a year. It's just interesting to look at. Next, please. And again, this is the DPW budget allocation. So it's just based on the $431 that the average homeowner is paying and how that's broken down in dollar amounts. So essentially, just for general highway, out of that $431, about $101 is going to general highway. Interestingly enough, $66 of that goes to paving. And for every average taxpayer, about $40 goes to snow removal each year. Next slide, please. This is just a recount of our fiscal year 21 snow account. Right now, we're about $75,000 over what's budgeted yearly. So we're $351,400. Our appropriation for fiscal year 21 was $275,720. That's held level for 22. Of course, you can deficit spend for snow removal. And historically, you can see in the next slide, I believe, how that happens. So next slide, please. So, and here's just an account of the snow history year to year, and you can see it varies year to year. Apparently 2017, 2018, we probably had more storms. So it's of course variable on snowstorms and weather. This February has been particularly rough. We had a lot of storms. It's hard to understand sometimes. I'd prefer, and it's cheaper for the town if you get a 12-inch snowfall in over 12 hours versus a 2-inch snowfall over 24 hours. And we've had a couple of those in February, and they take a toll in labor. The guys are basically around, waiting to put salt down, waiting to plow, and just trying to keep everything clean. And those are the tough ones. But you can see here, the last few years, we've done a little bit better, and hopefully that trend continues. Next slide. Again, just a recap of the snow account. You can see on the chart up top how it varies year to year. And then down below, just highlighting, how many times we've gone out, whether it just be to put some salt down, treat the roads, or snow in, plowing. We've had a number of events this year, really going back to October. We lucked out in November and really didn't have anything. And then you can see February's peppered with yellow squares. Next slide, please. So basically, general highway, as I mentioned, is our largest allocation this year for stormwater management. That line item is going up by $25,000. That's to carry out all of the unfunded items in the MS4 and NIPD's permit that we are required to meet. We have a consultant who's working on that for us, where they're testing drainage outfalls. There's quite a program. Supplies. Heather and I had talked about this. The next two items actually supplies and engineering. Typically year to year, the DPW's had the highway account has had a $70,000 supply line item. And typically it's been overfunded. So we do have a need for engineering services pretty, on a year-to-year basis for different projects. So it was discussed to split that supplies item into two lines, $35,000 under supplies and $35,000 under engineering, which honestly makes it easier for me to procure engineering services as the need arises. So that was actually a real good idea on Heather's part. And then the pavement management plan is going up by $50,000 this year. The pavement management program and the debt exclusion that was approved is dwindling. And to keep up on that pavement management plan, we're looking to fund a little bit more through our budget. So fiscal year 21, the budget for general highway was $625,500. Fiscal year 22, it goes up to $695,500. Next slide, please. Again, pavement management funding, and I'm sure I don't have to talk too much about it. I'm sure you've seen over the years that the pavement management plan has been instituted, that the quality of the roads in Lunenberg has increased substantially, especially when you drive through other towns, and I won't pick on any. But just as an operational budget, general highway, this is a portion purchase of services is $26,000. Pavement management plan is $450,000. We get state funding under Chapter 90. We don't have that figure for fiscal year 22, but in 21 it was $416,000. And then the debt exclusion, which I mentioned is dwindling. The remaining balance that we have left is almost $280,000. I would have to say that the pavement management fund from my experience in coming to town since taking the job seems like it's been a great success, and I'm thankful to kind of inherit it. Next slide, please. And again, under pavement management, we're providing safer, more comfortable travel through our community, less time spent on what's only a temporary fix. I didn't put a slide in it this year, but I can see it's been in the past. We've kind of accounted for pothole maintenance and how many tons of cold mix we're using. This fall, we spent maybe 2 days fixing potholes and used a couple of loads of material. So the need's gone down drastically. Again, I think the pavement management plan has been a great success for the town. Other advantages to having nice roads is they're much easier to keep clear of snow, and hopefully drainage conditions have improved. We've installed berms, which directs water to drains and storm drains. Next slide, please. And again, this is just in support of pavement management. You've probably seen this one before. It just demonstrates the more maintenance you do on good shape roads is the less money you spend overall. So this one's just to reinforce the importance of the pavement management plan. Next slide, please. So we have the town highway garage. Essentially, we just supply office supplies. That's level funded at $1,040. Next slide. We have highway labor under the budget, includes salaries, longevity pay, as well as on-call and contract evaluation stipends. We have both union for the crew and SAP, which is basically covers myself and I believe Samantha. Actually, no, she's clerical. It does not include the facilities manager or cemetery superintendent. They are in their own line items. So this year, to account for salary increases and adjustments, we go to $501,105.45, small increase over fiscal year 21. Next slide. Traffic signs and devices, we have a line item of $28,253. This is level funded. This is for new street signs, replacing damaged and stolen signs. Unfortunately, stolen street signs is a thing. For street line and markings, and electrical charges for lighted signs around town. Next slide. Vehicle maintenance. So the DPW carries out vehicle maintenance for both the DPW, highway, police, fire, and school. We have a single mechanic who's great. I'm learning that very quickly. He can work on anything, and he does a great job. Again, this counts level funded at $182,480. Next. Cemetery department. I've already talked a little about the addition of 2 seasonal workers for 13 weeks, their clothing allowance at $1,100 total, an additional line item for supplies at $10,000. The goal is to provide additional manpower to cemetery superintendent to accomplish routine maintenance and upkeep at town cemeteries. I know there was a little bit of history here, and we are trying to provide the greatest of service to the cemeteries, to the people who use them, to the people who are interred there. So the fiscal year budget for cemetery we're asking for is $94,239.62. This is compared to $69,973.42 for fiscal year 21. Next, please. Tree removal. Basically, we provide a reactionary service for tree removal. We get calls, limbs come down. We go out and we take care of it. We take down trees where we can that we know if town residents request. But basically, it's a public safety service and it's discretionary in terms of what we do. We do what we can. A lot of the work is outsourced. Covers overtime and supplies for our own workers. Again, this is level funded for fiscal year 22 at $28,795.04. Next slide. Parks and Recreation, parks, facilities, and recreational programming. The facilities include Wallace Park, McNally Field, Fitzgerald Field, Marshall Park, Veterans Park, and the town beach. There's a slight increase in the budget just to account for salaries. Fiscal year 21, it's fiscal year 22 rather, is $95,705.65 versus $95,689.56 for fiscal year 21. Next slide, please. Public buildings, utilities. So we're in an agreement with Nexamp. Essentially, we're hoping to save 15% on some of our electrical bills. This account also covers heating, fuel, gas, water, sewer, and rubbish. And again, this is level funded for fiscal year 22 at $235,000, $553.10. Next, please. Facilities and grounds. This includes maintenance and repairs for Town Hall, the Public Safety Building, the DPW Garage, Eagle House, Ritter Building, the Old Primary School, the Town Beach, the Town Common, the Teen Center, TC Passios Building, and the Brooks House. Again, facilities and grounds, we're including in this year's budget an additional position, facilities technician. That accounts for the increase you see for fiscal year 22 of a budget line item of $562,412.06 versus fiscal year 21 at $518,000, $518,025.61. Next slide, please. So we do have some projects in the pipeline that are included in the capital planning. There was a directive this year to focus on the building envelopes for town buildings. So some of the things that are moving forward in the capital plan for fiscal year 22 are some items from the Vertex report at Town Hall. These are envelope items, including removing and replacing sealants at windows and doors, new basement windows, replacing the roof and repairing the brick around the building, and chimney repair. At the public safety building, we have a need to replace the chiller that supplies air conditioning to the entire building. And then the first floor carpet is in need of replacement and has become somewhat of a hazard. At the Ritter building, at last year's capital plan and town meeting, funds were approved to design a new ADA ramp construction for the main entrance to the building. So that's in the works currently. And for fiscal year 22, we're looking for the funds to carry out that construction. And then envelope items for the Ritter building include mortar repair and repointing, pressure washing brick around the building, brick repair and replacement, a paint job for the building, which would include scraping, preparing, and painting, replacing of rotted trim and fascia around the building and gutters, removing and replacing sealants between materials, between doors and siding and things like that, window replacement and wood shutter replacement.
Rob, can I interrupt you for just a second? Dave
Sure.
Passios. That list of projects under the envelope for Ritter, does that include the alternates? It's been a few weeks since I looked at the list. There were the funding that was approved through capital planning did not cover all of the original bullets for that project. I'm just wondering, does this include all of them, including some that are not funded, or is this all of the funded ones?
Heather can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think from what I presented to capital planning, there were some items that were included by the capital planning committee. And that's the items 6 through 12. I think originally I wasn't looking at doing all of it, and I think it was decided that it made more sense to do so. So I think that's where we stand. And I do have a slide coming up that shows the capital plan, and it identifies all of those.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. And if you're not familiar, I glossed over this. The Vertex report was done a few years ago by a consultant, and it addressed all the town buildings. So these were all items that were identified in the report. So if you're not familiar with it, that's what the Vertex report is, and that's what I was referring to. Next slide. So here is that capital plan. This is what's been approved for capital planning under DPW's purview. So we have, under the highway department, we're looking for a new 6-wheel dump truck with a plow and sander. Town facilities, I mentioned the chiller at the public safety building. Also under highway, we're looking to fund the replacement of the Flat Hill Culvert construction, which is currently under design. If you're not familiar with that, that's the out on Flat Hill Road by Shirley Lake. That's where we've had to close down one lane of Flat Hill Road because of some deficiencies with the existing culvert. Town facilities, the Ritter ADA ramp construction, then town facilities, town hall repairs. Another highway item, I'm looking to fund the survey, design, and permitting for culvert replacement at Page Street. And then the last two items on capital plan are the Ritter envelope repair projects and also the public safety building to replace the first floor carpet. And these are all items that have been moved forward by the capital planning committee. Next slide, which I think is my final. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening. I'm certainly glad to answer any questions.
Peter. Peter, are you muted? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just couldn't find the button.
Okay.
Seems like when you're sharing a screen, like the buttons just move around and I couldn't find it. Anyway, thank you for your presentation. I appreciate it. You mentioned all the various sources of funding for the pavement maintenance program, and you mentioned a significant amount of Chapter 90 funding from FY21. I recall about 170,000, not to beat a dead horse here, but a substantial amount of that money in FY21 went to the purchase of equipment. What's your take on how Chapter 90 money should be spent, and what constitutes pavement maintenance in this context?
I mean, it's dependent on what you have, and right now, Lunenberg is in a really good situation with their roads and the condition of their roads. I think at the time, the equipment you're referring to, I think it was 160,000 went towards a new trackless machine, which is essentially a bunch of different implements you can attach to it. Currently, we're using it as our sidewalk tractor. We have a snowblower on it, but when it was purchased with a cold planing machine to cold plane pavement. And what we're planning on using that for is when we do have a repair to make a patch or a pothole, we plan on using the cold planer to mill a nice patch and then make a nice, clean rectangular patch rather than, just filling and compacting a pothole. But getting back to the use of the Chapter 90 funds, I mean, the state allows you to use it for equipment purchases and other things, not just strictly paving. Obviously, my main focus would be on using it for paving, but needs arise, and it is convenient to be able to use it for other things, and other things do come up. The DPW still has other equipment needs, and I'm not saying I wouldn't look to use it in the future someday to purchase other equipment. Now, that equipment, mind you, has to be geared towards your pavement management. You can't go out and buy something that's not related to pavement management, but pretty much everything the DPW does and the equipment they use is geared towards, in some degree, used in pavement management.
I want to be judicious with our time. I've got a couple more questions and comments, but my additional comment on this topic is that one of the reasons why we were put in a position where we had to borrow in excess of $3 million to catch up with our payment problems was that in some cases we had a history of using that money in other places. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to be very judicious in what we're doing with that money, particularly when we are still going through the process of adding $50,000 to the pavement maintenance program on an annual basis. Mm-hmm. So, it kind of begs the question, well, why am I adding over here when I'm subtracting over here? Sure. And we have a capital planning process to deal with capital items. I noted that you had on your vehicle maintenance line 3 different lines for each the police and fire department vehicles. But I also recall seeing, at least on the fire department budget, that there were vehicle maintenance lines on the fire department budget as well. Could you comment what constitutes a highway department vehicle maintenance expense versus a fire department or police department vehicle maintenance expense?
Yeah, I mean, basically, we service all the cruisers. We service the vehicles from the fire department. I know the other day one of the rescue vehicles, the ambulances, was in the garage. Fire department has some specialized equipment that obviously we can't work on. So, I'm speculating because I haven't had this discussion before. But if the fire department has their own budget for maintenance on vehicles, I know they have to get specialized work on those vehicles at times. So
yeah, they do, and it's
we can't do everything.
it's a pretty big number. So
Yeah.
I just, if that is in fact the case, and the difference is that the money that we're spending through the fire department budget is going to outside sources, and the money that we're spending through the DPW budget is going to work that's being done in your garage, then that makes sense to me. But okay. Lastly, just a comment around the Parks Department. Sorry, Heather.
Actually,
No,
I'm
I
sorry,
was
yeah.
just gonna add, it's the same number. So the fire department and the police department in their budget presentations included those vehicle expenses. That's the same line items as what the DPW director included in his presentation. So it's not in addition to that.
So it's not in the fire department budget.
Yep. They just include it in their presentation as those are specific costs related to the fire.
Okay, I misinterpreted the fire department budget when I read it.
Heather, that includes outside repairs like pumps on engines and
Yeah.
all of that? Okay, thank you.
I'll go back and reread it. Thank you for the clarification. So just a bit of history for your benefit, Mr. Oliva. At the time that the Parks Department superintendent position was created, one of the justifications for that position was the ability to run programs in the Parks Department, like summer basketball and that kind of thing, that are, outside of the programs that are run on the town beach. And I made a comment to your predecessor last year that I really wanted to see those programs because they took a little while to kind of get up and running, from the time that position was created to the time that I noticed the programs happening. This year, I definitely noticed the programs happening. In fact, my son took part in a summer basketball program at Wallace Park. He took part in a flag football program down at Fitzgerald Field. But what I've noticed is that the communications and marketing of that program is frequently late, erratic, inconsistent. And what that's leading to is, in some cases, the programs aren't run because we don't have an adequate number of participants. And I understand the fact that it's not a core competency of a DPW to do communications and marketing, but I would encourage you to pay some attention to that in the coming year, because these are great programs and I'd like to see them used to the maximum extent possible.
Okay, note taken. I can add to that. I know COVID has really wreaked havoc with that program. And I know I know Kayla had a program that she was trying to do where she didn't know week to week whether it was happening, whether she could do it. And I know at last minute, she was trying to get the word out that this is going to take place, or she was canceling it. And so, to her defense a little bit, I know that's kind of really messed with things. So, but note taken, and I will, I'll keep an eye on that. And I know Kayla's great, and I know she's working hard at it. So we'll see if we can do a little bit better.
Thank you. And again, programs are great. I just want to see them used.
Okay. Chris.
Sure. So part of this, your budget is parks and cemetery related. Have these budgets been reviewed by those commissions?
Yes, I've spoken with both. Well, I've spoken more with cemetery. Parks, I haven't necessarily had a conversation with.
Okay, so I think we need to do that. And I think they need to do a vote on it, because they set policy. The aforementioned scheduling of programs comes under parks. I know cemetery had problems last year, like you mentioned. So I think it's really important that they get a take on it, and it should be before it comes to this meeting, that they've had the ability to review and approve the budgets, so it's in line with their expectations. And then okay. So on the facility tech, can you talk a little bit about what additional services will come with that position coming online?
Yeah, so currently Kit does as much, regular routine maintenance of things as he can. I mean, his day is basically a series of requests for, I need this at town hall, this lights out. So he's constantly running in circles and doesn't always do the more planned and routine things, preventative maintenance type things that he wants to, at least not on a timely basis. Having help for him will free both people up to do those types of things. Kit also relies heavily on outside contractors and vendors for some things, he might otherwise be able to do, but just doesn't have the time. So it benefits that department in a number of ways. Just someone to respond to work orders as they come up, while one is, doing planned maintenance or, repairs that come up on other things on, HVAC systems, boilers, furnaces. So it basically creates, puts them in a position where we can do more preventative maintenance. We can do more routine things. And even some that we have outside vendors doing at the moment will likely be able to do in-house.
So do you see the ability to do proactive planning as part of that? And, one thing, I watch a lot of boards and commissions, and I never see anything that says, here's a report on the state of our facilities, that I would expect to, see almost on a quarterly basis. And if you walk around like Wallace Park, you see a basketball court with a tree growing through it. You see fences that are in disrepair. If you go down to Fitzgerald Field right now, there's a sign that's half broken hanging. At Town Beach a couple years ago, all of the equipment was not usable. It was unsafe. So I think that we do really well on certain things, like our roads. Honestly, I mean, they're great. And I agree. You go to any one of our borders and when you've hit the town line. But, things like our parks and, I think you need kind of that reporting on, here's what's going on and here's where we need to, see some attention. So would that be able to be done with that position coming online?
Yeah, and coincidentally, Heather's looking at funding for facilities maintenance software. We currently have some. I don't know if it's what we need through the school department. But yeah, my goal would be to, once that's in place, the facilities director will hopefully be utilizing that. And that's towards preventative maintenance on things. And we'd be able to report on, these are the things we've done and more closely monitor those types of things. So I would say yes.
Okay. So, if we're going to recommend that we fund that additional, I would expect to see that in the very near term once the position's hired. The town manager also sent us a list of the assets like bridges and culverts and the age of some of those. And some of them are really getting up there in age. And we already know we have bridges in town that are no longer bridges. And, we have the Flat Hill and Page Street that are coming up. Have you had a chance, or do you plan to have a chance to kind of forecast those and how those would play into the, let's call it the 10-year capital plan? Because any one of those could become kind of very disruptive to other activities that, are in that plan.
Right. Yeah. And Heather and I have had this discussion in coming up with a bridge and culvert kind of maintenance plan, or similar to the pavement management plan, in identifying and then, carrying out prioritized repairs, replacements on these things. Because you're right, in what we're looking at now is basically it's a reactive, well, this one's getting bad, so we've got to do it. So I don't know how it's been handled in the past, and I haven't had a chance to sit down and start looking at that, but it's certainly on my, it's on my radar to do, and it's one of the things I want to institute and, move forward, whether it's a 5-10 year plan. Yes, definitely.
Okay, and then my final question is on this snow budget. Is the are you going forward with the 300,000 or the 275?
Nope,
And
that's,
can you just kind of,
go ahead.
which one is it?
It's level funded. It's stayed the same basically, I think, the last 3 years. Basically, the slide I showed you is what we spent and how we're in a deficit, which the snow accounts you're able to spend in a deficit. So no, that's stayed level funded for this year.
So the request on slide 3 says 300,000.
I think that's what he asked for, but didn't get.
Yeah, I had pitched an increase to, if you look in my request column, I had requested more. I had kind of looked at, past histories.
Oh, okay.
I looked at some 5 and 10-year averages and had made some suggestions, but we do have the luxury of being able to deficit spend in those accounts. So that's why we've left it where it is.
And what's the benefit of being able to deficit spend and keep that lower?
I will let Heather answer that.
There's a lot of good reasons to do it, but yeah, Heather's probably got
This is
the
a
better.
fun one. Yeah.
Basically, Heather's muted. Okay.
Karen, do you want to take this? I mean, I'll try to answer it, but Karen's.
Well, if you want, I can go for it because basically you can make the number bigger, but you can't make the number smaller.
Right.
So basically, the more you budget, it basically limits what you can do with that number. But as long as you can deficit spend and you keep it low, you're not going to get yourself into trouble with spending.
Right. Once we increase it, we can't decrease that number.
So you saw that 1 year where they went to 275 and the spending was 275. You might be tempted to, oh, maybe we don't need to keep it so high. But yeah, it's one of those. Historically, it's been kept. They try to increase it a little bit, and if 275 is probably the last time it was increased was like a long time ago.
And we've been able to do interdepartmental transfers at the end of the year to cover that deficit the last couple of years. Otherwise, we would request those funds through the amendment to the current year's budget article.
Yeah, so and that's almost kind of my problem with it is I see a lot of interdepartmental transfers historically in the DPW, and even sometimes without the oversight of those boards and commissions that oversee those budgets. So it just seems to me that I don't see a day where we're going to spend $275K again on snow removal. And I just, again, towards transparency, if we're just setting at that and we're just going to rob one of the other ones, then where's the transparency on when and how that moves, and which board and commission is kind of approving that transfer.
Right, and I think your point's well taken in terms of making sure that it's not coming out of an account where if the board was providing oversight and was spending all of the money in there. Because the other thing that we're free to do is use free cash to hit that as well. So it's not that it has to be interdepartmental transfers. It just means that basically we can make it up next year. So, but Karen also unmuted herself, so I don't know if she had wanted to speak to that.
Well, no, but in reference to what was just talked about, I would say that when we get to the end of the year or close to the end of the year and we realize that there's going to be surpluses in some appropriations, in my opinion, it's better for the town to do those internal transfers and eliminate those deficits than it is to appropriate the deficit from free cash. Because, either way, it has the same effect, but in my opinion, if you're reducing expenditures or reducing budgets in other departments to cover the deficit, then that, in my opinion, is the way to do it. And we're only allowed to do it. It's general law that we're allowed to do it within the last, I believe it's 2 months or 45 days prior to the close of the fiscal year that you can do those types of transfers. So it's not like we would just take that money from an appropriation that you at a certain level. We only take money a level we talk of the year if there are two surpluses.
I'm losing her.
I also just basically just to go back to Chris's point, I think that that the question isn't, like, okay, so if we have to wait until the last month or two to make sure that there's money that hasn't been spent to do it, it's making sure that the money hasn't been set aside and not spent on the chance that we're going to need to use it. So that's basically, I think, where we're talking in terms of oversight, and making sure that that's happening so that the monies that are supposed to be spent for the purposes of the Cemetery Commission and the Parks Commission, that those funds are being spent under the meeting those objectives and goals that those committees have.
Yeah, or care and maintenance of our facilities that are across the board in poor states.
Yep.
I mean, we're going to be probably 100,000 at least over our actuals, over the appropriation for this year in snow, if we're at 350 as of 3/2 with Bill's income, so where this year is that money being made up from?
I don't know. Can't we do COVID for that?
The Finance Committee budget.
yeah, the Finance Committee has $50,000 somewhere. So,
Chris, that won't be fleshed out until May or June, till we see what budget lines are potentially available within the DPW to backfill that before they flow to free cash.
right. Well, actually, it's not always just the DPW either. It could be an external, what is it, a 32B transfer, 44 something?
33B.
Something B, that basically goes from a different department into that department as well. So it's flowed from different places over time, yeah.
Yeah, and Terry, that type of transfer comes to the Finance Committee, correct?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, so we're 8/12 of the way through the year, the fiscal year, I think, right?
Mhm.
And we should know our projected spending on every single account that we have out there. So I don't think we need to wait till May to understand where we think we're getting the $100,000 of overrun in the snow budget.
Oh, I bet Karen probably has a thought.
We start to discuss that.
What's that?
We start to discuss that at the end of the snow season, of where we look at all the accounts and see if there is going to be a projected surplus in certain accounts. And if not, then we would propose to do the transfer from free cash at town meeting.
I think the other argument for underfunding snow and ice, because you can do it, is that if you add an extra $100,000 to snow and ice and you don't need it, then you've taken that out of the budget somewhere else. So you've got the flexibility to budget that say the 100,000, I'm just using a round number. You have the flexibility to budget that 100,000 somewhere else. And if it turns out that it's not needed, or there's excess money somewhere else in the budget, then you bring it back in. So I mean, there's arguments both ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Chris, do you have more?
No.
Nope. Okay, Evan?
Just a couple of questions. So assuming the purchase of the Unitil of the street lights from Unitil finally makes its way through, we get a realistic quote from Unitil and whatnot. Do we need to reappropriate? Will we have to reappropriate funds to maintain those lights at that point, or has that already been done?
It's not been included specifically in this budget, but there will be maintenance of the existing lights until the new go up. So yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that's coming out of DPW, and there will be savings at some point, and we're supposed to be saving on the utility charges in some respect because of the 15% through Nexamp. So yes, there will be maintenance, and because those are old lights and they still burn out, and I imagine we'll own them for some time while the swap out is being funded, designed and funded. So yes,
Okay, is that just a conversation that happens at the time of purchase and whatnot, I assume? Or
I would assume so, yeah. And I mean, I don't really have much information now because we pay a lump sum to Unitil for maintenance. So I don't know specifically how much they're doing on a yearly or monthly basis. All I know is when we get a call about a light out, we call them up and hopefully they fix it. So I can't imagine it's a huge number, and it's for a short period. Hopefully the grant money comes through to do the swap out. Otherwise, it could be prolonged. But again, I don't have a real good handle on how much that is.
okay, all right.
Sorry. Never mind. Go ahead, Evan. I'll ask it later.
Okay.
Sorry.
As far as sort of preventative maintenance on trees around town and whatnot, does Unitil or any of the cable or internet or phone providers, do they do any preventative maintenance on trees around town, or is it strictly our DPW that's responsible for it?
No, Unitil, since the 2008 ice storm, Unitil has a pretty robust tree program, but it focuses on their lines. So say the opposite side of the road, they don't touch unless there's a tree that, poses a hazard of falling over onto the lines. So yes, while they do have a pretty good program, it doesn't cover everything.
Okay. So for example, there was this last windstorm we had, there were trees down on West Street. That was the DPW's responsibility for the cleanup and removal and all that. That's not.
Yeah. So if there's a limb on the ground and it's not impacting, Unitil's equipment, we're on the hook for it. So yeah, this week we did spend a couple of days, the first day just really getting everything out of the way. And then we were out there with the chipper and doing a real cleanup. So, yep. And when I said we're reactive on tree stuff, it's usually when something comes down. We only have so much money to take trees down, and then we do that through an outside tree company.
Okay. And just lastly, do we have a date when Next Amp is supposed to go live for that? I think you said 15% share. Is that for when that starts kicking in?
That's been going on for maybe 2-3 months now.
Oh, it's already started.
Yep.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay. I had no idea. Thank you.
Okay, so the one question I have is the purchase of service line for the parks. What does that cover? Is that field maintenance or something?
No, for most part, I think it's, and Heather, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's a lot of the programming. That's all kind of outside companies come in and do some, well, not all of it. They do some of it. And then if, they need to purchase equipment, purchase a service would cover that, among other things.
Okay, so basically, in terms of field maintenance or park maintenance, or where does that come from?
You're right. Some of we've had a landscaper in the past. I believe the parks that he was taking care of, that came out of purchase of service. So there is maintenance as well.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, getting back to the streetlights just very briefly. I think in the presentation from Green Communities, one of the pluses once this transition happens, and Rob did touch on it, is that those maintenance dollars that we're paying to Unitil will stay in the town. And Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, that should help offset the initial maintenance that DPW and or a contracted entity will take on once we own the streetlights. And then, if I understand it correctly, assuming we move forward fairly quickly with the grant money to switch to LED, that will most likely, going forward from that transition, be an outside contracted maintenance program. Did I cover that in the synopsis correctly?
Yes. So we would have to procure a maintenance contract, and especially in the interim, because we will have to maintain those lights before those are switched over as well.
Right.
to LED.
And one other question, just to make sure, I've commented about it a couple of times in other meetings, and I want to make sure I've got got it right. Once the transition is made to LEDs, my understanding is that we'll have solar credits that will need to transfer to somewhere else. Is that correct? Are we using solar credits to offset costs of electricity right now for the streetlights?
I believe streetlights is on the list. I just have to pull that. We have so many different accounts that they're in different net metering agreements that they're applied to different accounts, different percentages.
Mm-hmm.
I believe streetlights is one that we have credits that are applied to that.
Yeah, okay.
It would have to be transferred somewhere else.
They'll just
Okay.
send it over to the library instead.
Yeah, well, I cautiously mentioned that to the library when they were doing their presentation for, keep on the radar, because that is one of their major expenses over there is energy. And I said, I think, don't quote me, but I think there's going to be solar credits that might be available to maybe try to grab through the town manager. Okay, enough on that. That's projects that hopefully will move forward fairly quickly depending on the grant cycles. You brought this up to the fire chief and police chief during their presentations and had mentioned it a year or so ago. And that's a vehicle maintenance software program. There's no, to my knowledge, there's no correlation of the cost of our vehicles from the day they come in the door to the day we send them out the door, whether it be by auction or whatever. And compounding that issue is the fact that we have maintenance of vehicles being done by DPW, and then of course, out of necessity, outside entities for fire trucks and specialty work and anything that's beyond the scope of what can be done at the DPW garage. I'm wondering if, in your experience in the DPW field, have you seen a vehicle maintenance software program being used to track cost of a vehicle during its life?
Yeah, there is definitely software for it. We currently use a more basic tracking. So we track the maintenance done on each vehicle. The cost of parts is included. So you can, if you wanted to, I don't think the software does it or we're using it in that way, but if you can do a cost analysis, I think with the information that's gathered. I don't know how well it's been done over the years. I know Jim's only been in place for, he hasn't been there a long time as the mechanic. Yeah. So,
yep.
But I do know we're using software. I don't know its capabilities. I don't know if it's doing any, predictive, useful life on the vehicles based on money spent, or if it's doing that kind of analysis. I'd have to look into it, but we do track it, and it is, software based.
Rob, do you know if that includes the outside repairs that are done by necessity? I had a feeling it does not.
Yeah, I would say no. I really don't think so.
Yeah, and what's prompted me to ask this question continuously is that, especially on the fire side, we hear every year they don't make the vehicles like they used to. They don't last as long. They get into repair cycles much sooner. And I think we need to be keeping track of that. And, at some point, if we see a trend that says, well, this brand on paper is showing us that it's costing us 30% more in the last 5 years, in the first the last 10 years, in the first 2 years of the life of a vehicle, then some decisions can be made from using that data to shift and hopefully decrease that cost. That's basically what data is used for, especially that type of data. Okay. Fiscal plan. I think that's pretty much all I have. Chris had touched on a couple of issues vaguely with cemeteries and parks. As you all know, I'm the vice chair of parks, and I've been involved in trying to get a handle on what's been going on with parks even well before I was on the committee. And we're still working towards having more transparency so that we know what's going on during the budget season. We've just found out recently that that salary line that pays for beach salaries has already been overspent, and we've got 2 or 3 weeks before the fiscal year ends that the beach will be open. But we had no clue that that was the case until about a week ago, as we've started to dig down into our revolving account and accounts that pay for things that are needed for the parks, including maintenance and so on. So we have a very active and engaged Parks Commission now. We're not looking to intrude on the day-to-day operations, but we're looking to have some insight into the cost of the day-to-day operations, so we know how the department, as a Parks and Recreation department, is functioning on a financial basis, so that we can make policy decisions that either correct problems or enhance what we can offer going forward.
Okay, I mean, we can have that conversation, myself and the commission, on how to accomplish that and what you'd like to see.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I think that's it for me right now. Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't see any other hands up. Thank you. You did a great first presentation.
Thank you.
I think with that, again, last chance for any questions, comments, concerns, nothing. Okay, well, great. Thank you. And we'll see you next year.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.
Okay.
Take care.
Have a good night.
You too.
Next, the item on the agenda was Peter with the FinCom letter. Did you have a chance to take a look at that?
Yeah, I actually wrote it, or wrote a draft. I neglected to send it because I intended to do it on the weekend, and I did it this morning before work, or actually put it into a Word document. So I'm a little bit tardy. And I will send it via email to the entire committee following this meeting, and would request your comments directly back to me via email. I don't think that we should be editing live in the OneDrive due to open meeting issues. That being said, my hope would be, just in the interest of time this week, I had intended to read through this tonight. I'm exhausted and just don't have the energy to do it tonight. But I want to explain my thinking, and hopefully you can give this some thought when you review the document on your own time. As I looked at past letters on the warrant over the last few years, for the most part, the letters are very straightforward and are just sort of a narrative account for what you then see in the budget, with some context around percentages and increases and proportions of the entire budget. But it was not my belief in most of those letters that they added a whole lot of context to the overall time and financial situation that the town was experiencing that drove the decisions around the budget. And that took a pretty substantial turn with not the most recent warrant, but the annual town meeting warrant for June. And I think that the reason why it took that turn was COVID and the need to contextualize a lot of the decisions that were made around some cuts that we made, the decision to defer on the capital plan, and a number of other things. But I can tell you that having read that one versus having read some of the other ones, I think that we did a much better job as a finance committee in setting the context for the voters at town meeting in terms of what we're experiencing here, what are some of the long-term things that we need to look out for, and what are the other major parts of the budget that are capturing our attention. And so I made some editorial decisions here to try to do that, but it's just one man's opinion. And so what I would hope is number one, feel free to comment back in writing, but maybe next week, assuming we can move the meeting along efficiently, we can have a 20, 30-minute conversation around, is this the right thing to do or not? Because I just think that our charge really is to advise and recommend to the voters at town meeting, and I think that we need to do as good a job as we can in painting this contextual picture, more so than doing math on their behalf to show that the school department is 52% of the total budget, right? I mean, while that's important, it's not nearly as important as, the one-time revenues that are coming in that are going to represent, cliff problems next year and that sort of thing. So anyway, that's where we're at. I like I said, it is here, but I don't think any of us has the energy to spend a lot of time in deliberating on it tonight.
When is that due? Is that
30th, the 30th.
And we're gonna get the school budget?
On the 18th.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're a couple of weeks away from the school budget, and we'll have the meeting after the school budget is going to be the public hearing.
Yep. And by the way, the other thing is that we're going to learn and edit this thing over the course of the next few weeks, because just tonight, things came up in the Monty Tech discussion that I literally added while that was going on around the Sr2 issue that I was unaware of. There, I do think we need to think about, is it worth including some of these proposed positions in the parks, in the DPW? So, we can add and subtract from this as we learn more over the course of the next several weeks.
So just back on the 30th, that means we have to approve it on the 25th?
Yes.
So in the past, we have not made a vote to approve this letter. It has been basically what has happened is last year, Michelle Walton, who was the vice chair last year, collected comments, put it back together, and then there was sort of any last edits to be made. Otherwise, it's by acclamation, and it was submitted. My preference would be to actually vote on it on the 25th. I think that's a better practice.
Yeah,
we can't change it between the 30th and town meeting?
Because it's going in the warrant.
I understand, but can't we have something that we have as a paper flyer on the?
Oh, sure. You can do that.
I mean, basically what happens is the letter that goes in the warrant pretty much does, the purpose is to basically support whatever recommendation we're about to make to the town. Now, there's some information that's known, some information that's not known. If we don't recommend the budget per se or as it's written, that's one thing. But if there's there's a lot of stuff that's not even known by the time the warrant goes out. So there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to, on the 25th, hold any recommendation until town meeting. That's not unusual, especially if we don't have the numbers or if we don't feel like we have sufficient information to make a recommendation. For the most part, the finance committee letter, in my experience, has really just addressed the budget itself and the capital plan, the major parts of the what's being presented. But Heather Soroka, you put your hand up, so I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on.
Well, I just did the minutes from the January meeting, and the whole timeline is right in the minutes. We talked about this, the warrant letter. So we have the draft was due March 11th, which is next week. Committee comments and concerns for March 18th, and the final review and approval will be March 25th. It's all right there.
Yes,
I just didn't have that in front of me. I guess my concern is if public comment is on the 25th and we have no even ability to affect a letter that is adding color to why we're making our recommendations one way or another, I'd rather see us just put in the warrant, the kind of boilerplate percentages, whatever, and then have a letter that we can, we have debated and discussed as a committee in April leading into the May meeting.
Actually, I guess I'll wait until we'll see what Peter's put together, and we'll see what information is in there, what information, the boilerplate stuff we'll see, because there's no reason why it can't both happen. But I think that until and it was a strange year with all of the COVID stuff going on, and with all of the extra state funding and all of that stuff going away, and what's that going to mean for FY23. I think it's, it's good to give people a heads up about that kind of stuff, but not having the letter in front of me, I don't know.
I think Chris's point is a fair point. I think that the difference between, past years and what Chris just described is that color and context letter never really happened. Right? Like it was kind of the boilerplate letter would go on the warrant, then you get the finance committee recommendations at town meeting, but there was I can't think of a time when there's been an additional communication from the finance committee that represents additional context between the end of March and the beginning of May. But I think that that's a fair suggestion and one that we could consider.
Okay, Evan, you have your hand up.
Just a question on kind of procedure for responses back to the letter. Are we supposed to reply all for those?
No.
No.
Do not reply all.
Okay.
Don't do that.
I just want to make sure.
No. Thank you for I meant to clarify that.
Yeah, and I will, God willing, we can be judicious with our time next week. And I do want to kind of read the current draft so that people who are paying close attention to our meetings understand what it is we're talking about. Because I am very conscious of the fact that we need to do this in compliance with open meeting law.
Well, I will say that next week is public access, sewer, and administration, unclassified, and debt service. So I think that we'll be fine on time. So public access, I think, doesn't take more than a half hour typically. Sewer only asks for a half hour, so that's really kind of interesting. And Heather talks fast if we ask her to. And actually, so then we'll look for the letter next week. I'll try to remember to make sure I leave that on the agenda. And so at this point, then, if somebody would want to, do you need us to put up the draft articles, or do you want to just talk about them? Some of the ones in particular, because certainly the first 10 are all pretty standard. It's the ones that when you get after that look kind of interesting.
Probably be best if they're up, screen shared.
Okay, does somebody have access to those really quickly?
I have them right here. Hang on.
Okay, go ahead, Evan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. These are the updated ones that you sent out today, correct?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So like you said, Terry, most of these are our annual articles, like our revolving fund spending limits. Those have to be voted every year now, the spending limits. Evan, if you can go down. We have our annual budget articles, so to make any amendments to the current year's fiscal budget if needed. Next year's fiscal budget article. There's the capital planning article. There is, and this is hard to read from this, and I don't have a copy in front of me. So there's, thank you.
Okay, that's okay.
If you can keep going down, there will be 3 articles on this town meeting warrant for 3 different bargaining units to fund the first year of the agreements. So the fire, the clerical, and the DPW.
Do we have them?
We do not. We're in the midst of negotiations. We've had 2 meetings each with the fire and the DPW. And we have our first initial meeting with the clerical on the 17th.
Okay.
If you can go down, we have the regular stabilization fund that we're requesting at this point to deposit $100,000 into. The special purpose stabilization fund, there's an article on there. It's a placeholder.
Does 100,000 bring us to the 5%?
Karen is working on the exact, but it's actually in probably excess of that.
Okay.
The Opeb trust fund is based on our financial policy of depositing 10% of the previous year's certified free cash, and that amount would be the $180,418, I think it is. The next article is the solid waste program enterprise account. The water enterprise account. And a new stabilization account, the health insurance stabilization account that I've talked to the committee before on. This would address the premium holiday that both the town and the school are realizing. And I'll talk about that amount a little later. The Cemetery Commission submitted an article to transfer appropriate 15,000 out of their sale of cemetery lots account. This is in addition to their operating budget. And there are 2 articles Karen submitted to rescind borrowing authorizations for the middle school, high school project. And the PAC submitted their budget article. You'll hear more from them on that next week. This the letter T right now, is an article from the select board for the old primary school for design costs, for landscape and engineering costs related to making that into a passive recreation area, open space area. Right now, Money Tech is working on CAD drawings for that. So that's like the initial concept phase, which this would bring it to that next level of design.
So this does or does not include demolition?
Does not include demolition. No, and we still need to get an estimate for what that cost would be.
Okay.
The U is related to amending the APD bylaw, and that would bring, if in an instance like the old primary school, that town meeting would have the, and this was just discussed at the select board meeting, it would bring it back to town meeting to override that, if it was in the best interest of the public to demolish that building. That's an example of it, the use of that. And at this time, that's all the the articles that have been submitted. We're expecting an article for the TCP building committee.
And
As
two sewer articles.
I'm sorry, and yeah,
There's usually two sewer articles.
yeah, they have a meeting on Tuesday to vote on their articles. So we'll receive them on Wednesday next week. And Personnel Committee is meeting Monday. They'll be submitting an article as well.
Do you need an article to get a estimate on the demolition cost of the primary school, or would that be under a threshold? Or?
To get an estimate?
Yeah.
No. We have the cost because we did a hazardous survey. So we have that estimate for the abatement piece. And we have estimated costs for demolition from previous condition assessment reports.
So you have the estimate, or I'm confused, I guess.
For the abatement, we have the estimate.
Yeah.
Yes. And there have been estimates given in previous building condition assessments, such as the Vertex report has an estimate in there.
Okay.
If they wanted to go out to bid to have it done, to get that kind of an estimate, then yeah, that would have to go to town meeting.
We'd need an article to appropriate a cost,
Yeah.
you know, to do it, to do the work, certainly. Yeah.
I'd like to see that article put on.
I think there's several people that would like to see that article put on. Dave would put it on again. All right. I was trying to think if there was another question that I had as we went through those. Actually, can you just clarify for the revolving accounts? There are some that need to be in there for the limit, and there are some that do not. Is there a reason why some do and some do not?
These are, Evan, could you go back up to the top?
Sure.
Thank you. So these accounts, they're 53 E&1/2 accounts.
Okay.
That's why those spending limits need to be reauthorized every year.
All right. So 53D do not.
Yep.
Okay.
Is planning board submitting any articles?
Yeah, thank you. They are submitting an article as well for parking. It will, I was told it's only a table. It will not be 18 pages. So take up much less space in the warrant.
Okay, and there's probably no financial impact associated with it.
No, I talked to the land use director about that. He doesn't perceive, any, yeah, you could look at it conceptually, like if it were to reduce parking for certain businesses, there'd be a financial impact to that business. That would be an example of,
yeah,
you could interpret it, but.
Okay.
Could I ask a question about the ambulance billing item there on the revolving? Before I do that, Terry, is it appropriate to ask a question about revenue coming into that?
Sure.
Okay. Because that's something that wasn't covered in the fire chief's presentation, and I don't think I've ever heard it. And that is, I see that the limit is set at $100,000. Is that all we're bringing in from ambulance billing in a given year? And this is authorizing spending $100,000 out of that? Or am I misunderstanding what we're doing here?
I have to go back to the original
Karen can probably also.
bylaw, but Karen Brochu is the best person to answer that.
$100,000 number that you see there is just the fees that are paid to the third party company that does the collections for us and the other ambulance services that provide assistance to the town. It's not how much is collected and ambulance revenue, that is taken into the general fund. But if the amount that's taken into the general fund that for ambulance revenue is net of any fees that are taken into this account to offset the related costs.
Okay, so theoretically, there's 100,000 plus or minus moved into that account, and then the authorization is up to 100,000 to pay outside entities during the year. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's put in there so that basically they're assuming they're going to hit that number, so they're able to spend. So, and that's why it's set at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
Any other questions on any of the articles presented or any of the ones that we're anticipating will be presented?
I have one, not about one that's in here, but is there any movement on the presentation that Greenleaf had put together in, I think, February or so? Is there a warrant that's going to be coming that we should be expecting for anything regarding that building or anything? Or is that probably in the fall?
Nope, that would not require a town meeting article. That just goes according to the process set by the state. Or so they're working right now with the select board on a host community agreement. Their community outreach, which is part of the process, is next Wednesday at 7 p.m. through Zoom. So, and they have to abide by the bylaws.
And that's all done through the select board, then it doesn't actually have to go to town at all for the approval of that?
The approval of the bylaws was through town meeting. So they had to adhere to that and go through that process. And outside of that, there's the required process according to state.
There may be a zoning variance required, so
Right.
maybe go to zoning board of appeals, right?
Right, but it would still have to, abide by the bylaws. Yeah, go through that process. Mhm.
Yeah, typically the establishment of of a company doesn't necessarily have to, once all of the other bylaws have been passed, that it's just operating a business, so.
Okay, so the lettuce farm that was in last fall, that was simply because it was the purchase of the land to be used for the company? Is that
It was the TIF.
TIF, yeah.
That was the tip. Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, if they didn't want a TIF, if they weren't going to do a TIF, they would have just gone ahead with building the business.
Okay. That makes much more sense.
With
I'm
the
sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to add through the bylaws and through the appropriate permitting authorities.
Yeah. All right. As Heather mentioned, Heather Soroka mentioned that the minutes are in the folder. I know that I saw them. I don't know if anybody else saw them. I did make a couple changes. So, and the only changes that I made, just to let people know, would be to spell out Capital Planning Committee for the benefit of people who might not know what Dave was talking about for that period of time. And then I think that was probably it, really.
Yeah, I saw him. I corrected one typo.
Okay.
I saw that.
I'm sorry?
I
You saw them
as
as
well.
Okay, so is anybody then prepared to make a motion to approve the minutes of January the 28th, 18th? 28th?
28th. So moved.
Okay. Do I have a
Second.
second? Okay, so I have Evan with the motion, Dave with the second. All in favor? Chris?
Aye.
Dave?
Hi.
Heather?
Aye.
Evan?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Jay?
Aye.
Aye for myself. Thank you, Heather. And then,
And we can probably take down the warrant.
Just noticing that.
well, you just never know, Committee and department reports, do we have any?
I got a bunch of them. You want me to take it on first?
Yeah, you might be the only one, so.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah,
Okay.
been a busy week on my side of the fence here. First of all, Monday evening, Parks Department met. We had an extensive discussion on our present revolving fund and the pros and cons of changing to a, I'm not even going to try to remember which one's which. But anyway, at the end of that discussion, we've decided with some more information, a lot of it provided by Karen Brochu, that we have decided we don't know enough about the reason for changing yet. So we are not going to pursue that at this time. So we will not be submitting a warrant article for that purpose for Springtown meeting.
Thank you.
We will, however, be continuing to study it and may decide in the future to change the type of revolving fund that that our revenues would go into. Second, long discussion for the evening was on parks, property uses and fees. A lot of it surrounding conversation about use of the beach and the beach house and the upcoming beach season rates. I'm not even going to try to give a synopsis on what we decided on. Please listen to the meeting if you want to hear. We did restructure the fees for the beach to hopefully make it more affordable for families on the day rates or the half day rates or whatever you want to call them. And we will have season passes this year. And all those rates were set also. And we had a brief discussion about Marshall Park. We were already 2.5 hours into the meeting by the time we got to it. So we had some very brief discussion, and we're presently planning on basically having a workshop to focus on Marshall Park on Monday, March 29th. That's it for parks. TC Passios met last night. And most of our evening was spent discussing possible paths forward and our upcoming communication in a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen, which will be next Tuesday, March 9th. That's about all really I can report on that at this point. We have a couple of things we want to bring to the Board of Selectmen for clarification and to discuss and hopefully have a path forward after that meeting. And then this evening, a little while before this meeting, Capital Planning met. At the 11th hour, the school district decided to approach the Capital Planning Committee to amend their request for capital projects for 2022 in that their air conditioning project for the primary school was prioritized at the very bottom of the list for reasons I don't think I'll go into because it's all speculative. They decided to bring forward from 2023 the fire alarm project at the primary school. We had some, although we only had 3 members, we had some very extensive discussion about the whys and why nots as to whether or not we'd approve it or not to adjust the capital plan as approved and presented to the town manager. And again, that's another meeting that people need to listen to hear our whys and why nots. Ultimately, we voted to not change the capital plan recommendation for 2022. And that is my report. Next meeting for capital planning will be on April 6th. And we're hoping that we will not have anything else come up so that we can dive into the capital planning policies and have something to pass on to the Finance Committee in early April.
Okay. Thank you. Peter?
School committee met last night. They had a very extensive agenda. Quite a bit of time was spent on assessment reporting, which the school department has taken some of the new assessment capabilities from some of the online tools they've invested in over the course of the last year to determine if students are at, above, or below grade level in standard skills, arithmetic, math, science, that kind of thing. Math and arithmetic are the same thing, I guess. In any event, and so they spent a lot of time on that topic. The superintendent did brief her final budget recommendation in advance of their public hearing, which I believe is at their next meeting on the 17th. A couple of notable things from that presentation, she directly connected a number of positions, some new positions, some reclassified and reconstituted positions, and directly connected them to some of this Sr2 funding, which is a topic of discussion tonight with respect to Monty Tech. This is money that is actually, I believe, going to be available even beyond FY22, but suffice to say, it's money that will expire at some point. But a lot of those positions are oriented to challenges anticipated by kids falling behind due to hybrid learning and remote learning, social emotional after effects of the pandemic, and a number of other challenges. So some of the hope is that the need for some of those positions may diminish over time and or be reclassified later on. The superintendent did mention her conversation subsequent to our conversation last week, I believe, about the health insurance stabilization account, and her hope that that will help to smooth some of the cliff issues that we've been discussing. One notable item that I learned last night that I maybe hadn't heard before or hadn't sunk in was that there's a belief that one of the reasons that we saw essentially flat funding in Chapter 70, a very slight increase, I want to say 0.1x% for this fiscal year, is that the numbers were based on October 1st enrollment. And in Lunenberg, due to a number of reasons, our October 1st enrollment was lower than normal. And therefore that affected our Chapter 70 plan, our proposal from the governor's budget. And that she has met with our legislative delegation and has lobbied the legislature to do a FY19 based calculation for enrollment on a one-time basis rather than looking at the FY21 numbers. And the reason being is that would, I guess, create a more normalized view of enrollment in a particular school department. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. But maybe there's hope that that a new accounting approach may lead to a better situation with respect to our Chapter 70.
Peter, would that be something that all the districts across the state would see, or is that just some unique?
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, yeah, it's a great question, right? I mean, if ours is low, wouldn't everybody else's be low? I have no idea. I really don't know. But I'm just repeating more or less what I heard.
Okay. And then those positions that you said would be Sr2 funding, are those would be like temporary hires, or that?
Well, I mean, so they're permanent hires. They're going to be employees of the school department. The question is will they be rehired in the future? And it's, somewhat relevant or somewhat based on need and available funds, right? So it's not clear, what our funding capacity will be beyond FY22.
Yeah, my read on this one would be that anything that's paid for with the ESSER's money is not going to appear in the school budget. It's going to be basically outside the budget or the school or the fund. I don't know if the grant funding shows up
That was not
as
my
a revenue
read,
source.
that was not my read, but I'm not sure I fully understood it. So
Okay.
I'm sure we'll
maybe
discuss it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually, Heather Soroka probably knows how the school budgets work in terms of when there's grant funding, whether the grant funding shows up as in the revenue stream and then the grant spending shows up in the school budget.
Well, I watched the meeting last night too, but I took away from that she was only planning on funding those positions for 2 years. And then they would go away because the money would probably not be there. And she wasn't sure how they would have funding for that, because I believe they asked that question about sustainability for all of the positions, because she had a lot of positions up there, not just the ESSER ones, but the other ones as well on her screen. But the ESSER ones, I thought she said that we could anticipate them being for 2 years only, and then they would have to reevaluate them to see if they had the funds for them because they were a grant program.
I think we're more or less saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Karen, you unmuted, so I assume you had an answer to my question.
I know the Sr2 funding is available to be spent through September 30th of 2023. And as far as the expenditure of the grant funds, you wouldn't see it in the school's appropriation. It would be totally aside from it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other reports, questions, comments? Okay, then if Heather Lemieux is still here and awake, or actually we could just go to the finance director for a report, or is there any report? Town manager or finance director report?
We have Heather times 2 right at the moment.
The real Heather is on.
Yeah.
Well, the real Heather, please stand up.
All I have tonight is that adjustment worksheet to go over.
Am I the only one that has it?
I've got
Or
it.
did you send it to everybody?
Send it to
Oh,
the
good.
committee and Karen.
I got it.
Okay. Who wants to put it up?
I'll do it. I'm-
Peter's got it.
All right. So basically, it's just the only changes since last time are related to the health insurance. So we found out from the PEC that they agreed to add the vision plan as an optional insurance. This added another 0.5% reduction to our active plan renewal costs. That brought our rate renewal from the 0.47% to minus 0.03%. On the town side, that was a further reduction of $3,500. And so now that we have the total cost related to insurance for next year, that we have the town and the school numbers for how the holiday premium holiday impact will be. And so on the town side, it will bring a savings of $128,076.36. On the school side, it will bring a savings of $241,257.67 for a total of $369,334. So that's what the recommendation at this point is to put into the health insurance stabilization account. So that brings our current surplus to $308,857. I will be working on a recommendation to change the transfer from the special purpose stabilization account. I think we're in a position we don't have to take money out of that account and leave it. Those funds there, the $211,000 that was going to go towards the purchase of the Dpw large vehicle, and instead take it from another available source. Karen's working on the unexpended capital articles. So once those figures are known, we'll have a better idea of that recommendation. So that will be forthcoming.
Good. Any questions? Okay, we can take that down. Thank you. Any other announcements or reports? Nothing to, okay. Then we can move on to, does anybody on the committee have a public comment? Does anybody in the public have a public comment? Seeing no public comments. Next meetings, next week, we will have public access sewer and the administration. On 3/18, the following week, we're with public schools, information technology, and any moneyed articles that appear between now and then. When does the warrant close?
15th at 4 p.m.
15th at 4 p.m. Okay. So we'll have some sense of what the moneyed articles are. And if there's nothing else, then I'm happy
I do have a
to.
question. When
Okay.
do we plan, Heather Schroka had made a request for some personnel type information. Which meeting do we plan to?
Oh, that's right, on the
Do that
personnel.
on.
When is the personnel committee going to present that information or different information?
Oh, no, the other stuff that Chris is talking about, like Mr. Cassidy brought it up at last night's meeting, but we still haven't received it from him, even though he says he
Oh,
has
that
it.
information.
Okay, so Mr. Cassidy says he has it and he's going to forward it to us. But Heather was going to work on the town side.
Okay. When did you want to have that for discussion on before the schools, or, so you're hoping to have it for next week? Is that possible to have it for next week?
He said he was done with it last night. He announced it at the meeting.
No, actually, well, see, you can't tell, but I'm looking at Heather Lemieux.
Oh, I'm sorry. He said,
No.
I will try to have it for next week. I'll be
Okay.
working on my presentation for you for the administration piece as well.
Okay. Okay. Then, yes, we'll have that. But actually, the other information, I'm going to assume that the Personnel Committee won't be presenting until the public hearing, or is there something that it would be good for us to hear from them on prior to that? For the, or what information is the Personnel Committee working on that they're creating an article for?
Both adding positions to the comp and class plan with grades and the longevity article within the personnel bylaw.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Chris. Yeah, I thought you were talking about something completely different, so, yeah.
No, I was just asking about that because I know that was one thing we had requested, and I don't know where the 25th could become a very long meeting.
Oh, it's going to be a long meeting anyway. The public hearing meeting is always a very long meeting, so bring energy bars.
I'll be on.
But I am happy to, well, we have to have energy bars because we can't have cookies. So then with that, I am happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
No.
Second.
Was that Peter or Jay with the second?
that was Jay.
Okay. Then, okay, so Chris,
Aye.
Evan,
Peter.
I'm sorry?
Aye.
Jay, did you say that Peter was the one that seconded it?
I didn't second it.
Oh, you
Okay,
didn't?
so it was
do
Peter.
it?
Yeah, it
Oh,
was
okay.
Peter.
We got to start over.
I'm not sure who seconded.
It was Peter. All right, so Chris Menard made the motion, Peter Beard seconded, and okay, all in favor.
Now we need to defeat this.
Wait,
Chris. Chris was
Aye.
aye. Evan,
Aye.
Peter,
aye.
Jay,
Aye.
Heather,
Aye.
Dave,
Aye.
and I for myself. So we are adjourned at 9:56. See you all next week. Thank you.
Night, everybody.
Night,
Have a good
everybody.
Take care.